everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Today, we got cool junk to talk about. So what we got? Boop, 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 boop. All right, so today we're going to talk about what life is like for the typical American family in the 1950s. Now, caveat here, the next 2 days, we're going to talk almost exclusively about the civil rights movement, all right? Because black people are going to come out and demand to be treated as equal with the rest of American citizens. Television cameras are going to play a huge part in that. And we're going to talk about that in depth. So when I start talking about how fantastic everything is here in the 1950s, the 13% of the population that is African American at the time, not seeing any of the cool stuff that is happening in the 1950s, because the civil rights movement will kick up here in the 1950s. But that is worthy of its entire separate storyline. And we'll spend 2 days on it because it's absolutely baffling that happened in our country 60 years ago, 70 years ago. All right, so today we're going to talk about the 1950s and how society really fundamentally changed a lot more of what we see today in your day-to-day activities and how things happen. All right, so this picture here, this dude right here, all right, was a famous actor in the 1950s. Do you know who that is? Now, if you don't, that's fine, because I'm going to tell you who this is. All right. But this guy changed the way actors, specifically male actors, look. This is not how typical male actors look. Prior to this, and this is James Dean, by the way. James Dean, prior to this, you had usually older guys, slicked back hair, like little pencil mustaches, like they're older guys. He comes in, all right, and he's just absolutely fantastic. I think he does only 4 movies that were relatively popular. All right, he's a good actor, extremely good looking, and he does like 4 movies, but then he dies in a car accident, a horrible car accident, and he dies. When he dies, it actually makes him more popular, kind of like Paul Walker. There are similarities between the two, except for the fact that James Dean was the first guy that looked like this. People look like this. I mean, movie stars do. But people realize this is the image that you want in movies. You don't want old guys playing lead characters. You want young guys. This is the image. So James Dean, this is just James Dean's style. All right. But after James Dean, this is what people want in movies. Your parents, grandparents maybe start after him comes like Paul Newman and stuff like that. Your parents when they were younger, it was stuff like Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise, the clean cut, strong jawline. Present day, it's Channing Tatum, and these good looking actors. That is typically comes out of the 1950s, all right? Because this James Dean is what is considered to be the handsome Hollywood movie star. All right, because prior to that, you know, there's all types of different types of attractive people, and like different people find different things attractive. 1950s is when Hollywood settles on this is the face. This is the face that we want right here, and this is the actors that get the big name budgets a lot of times. There are people that have this style of face, and this is what people go for commonly, even in present day. All right, even though obviously today with Jason Momoa, is that his name? And The Rock and Will Smith and all these other, at least we've got more diverse today, but there is still a market for this, this facial structure and a certain acting ability. Anyway, comes out in the 1950s. So I want to show you this as we start talking about the lifestyle in the 1950s. All right, the family in the 40s and the 50s. All right, so let me give you a rundown here of what generally is going to happen in the 1940s and 50s. All right. So, say there's Sally and Billy, all right, that they're in high school. So I'm getting ready to tell a whole story about how Sally and Billy, they're dating in high school, get married, go to war, and all this other stuff. And so I used to, like my first few years teaching, randomly pick people in class, like Sally and a Billy in the class. All right, and you guys are dating, got married, all this other stuff. And it was funny for a while. And then I did it one time, and it was like the whole class didn't laugh at all at my story, which I think is enjoyable. That I'm getting ready to tell you. And then it was like at track practice, one of my athletes came up to me. He's like, "Hey, I don't remember what two students it was. Sally and Billy, like you used them as your example of them like getting married and everything and having kids. They just like broke up this weekend." And I was like, I didn't have any idea that they were like dating or anything. And man, my soul died because I put myself in that situation. So, oh my gosh, I've one of the top 10 most embarrassed I've ever been in my life, and I felt horrible. And then I felt like I couldn't even like bring it up the next day in class because that would just make it worse. So I just had to ignore it forever, and I feel awful about it. Here, if I was in class, I would just use Sally and Billy anyway because I ain't getting anywhere near that type of landmine. All right, so here's the story. And this was very, very common. And I bet if you got great-grandparents or anybody that remembers anybody that went through World War II in this situation, there's probably going to be a pretty similar story to this. So I got to lay the baseline here because all the stuff that we're getting ready to talk about today makes sense if you understand what was an extremely common scenario for people at this time period. All right. Billy and Sally, they're high school juniors or seniors. Try to imagine. All right. Billy and Sally, they're dating. All right. I would say that this is senior year, December 7th, 1941. We're attacked by the Japanese. And oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And Billy gets drafted. All right. Billy's going to go off to war in World War II. Well, Billy's been dating Sally for like 3 weeks now. In 1941, all right, when dating took place, here's what dating was, is the boy went to the girl's house and he sat across the room and talked to Sally, who's on another couch across the room while her two parents sat on each side of her, all right? This was the extent of dating in 1941. So, what happens is Billy gets drafted, all right? Now, Billy, instead of telling Sally, "Hey, sorry, I'm going off to war," Billy turns around and Billy and Sally, and this is extremely, there's millions of Billy and Sally combinations around the country. I'm just using Billy as an example as one of these examples, and this is the most common thing that happened. Billy and Sally, instead of like breaking up when Billy goes off to war, Billy and Sally get married. Like, they've known each other 3 weeks. Boom, they're married. All right. They go off to have a weekend honeymoon. And then Billy gets shipped off to basic training and then goes fighting the war. Now, I always ask, why do you think that is? And most of y'all, especially the guys, are like, I know why that is. I know why that is. All right, not saying that may not be a motivating factor for some of these people. There is a much more logical reason why these young men and women are getting married, and they're getting married at 17, 18 years old before they go off and not see their wife or husband again for years. There's a very logical reason of this. And I learned this when I was in college. After September 11th happened, I was in college, and a friend of my brother's who was older that was in the National Guard had got called up and he was going to get deployed over to Afghanistan. He was engaged at the time. Same girl had been dating for years and years. And they were engaged, but he was going to get deployed before they got married. So instead of just postponing the wedding until they got back, they went to the courthouse and got married officially before he went to Afghanistan. When he came back, they had their big wedding that they had planned. But they did officially get married before he went to Afghanistan. And I thought that was odd. I'm like, why did you do that? Why not just wait? And he told me a reason. It's the exact same reason they're doing it in the phrasing. So the same reason people were getting married in 1940s before World War II is the same reason they got married present day. If you're married and you get shipped over to a war zone, you get paid double. You get paid more. If you're married, you get paid more if they ship you to a war zone. So all these men go get married before they leave so that they can get paid more. Now, so here's what happens in World War II. They get shipped off. We'll say they go to Europe. They're gone for 4 years, all right, fighting Hitler over in Europe. The wife typically, all right, and this is extremely common, the wife will typically stay at home with her parents, all right? She's married, writes letters back and forth to her husband. That's it. When the war is, so for 4 years, the husband is over there getting paid bank. Does he have anything to spend his money on? No, it's a war zone. There's nowhere to spend money. So his bank account is just filling up, all right? He's making bank. When the war is over, the husband will come back home. He's had 4 years of combat pay, and he hasn't spent any of this money. So big old nest egg. Comes on back to America, all right? When he gets back, he goes to his wife's parents' house, all right? And says, hi. Like he hasn't seen a female in 4 years. He's like, hi. Going to go see his wife. Hi. All right. And his wife's like, hi. All right. And they're like making googly eyes to each other in like the foyer of their parents' house. Their parents looking back and forth at both of them like, no, you don't use those eyes with each other in here. No. Y'all find your own place, like spraying them off with a hose because they hadn't seen each other in 4 years. Because the women that are left here, there's not a lot of men left here either because they're all off at war. So this young married couple making googly eyes at each other, like 22 years old now. So what do they need? They need a house. All right. There is a desperate, massive need for a house. All right. Houses are absolutely in huge demand. It takes a really long time to build a house, but you have millions and millions and millions of couples now that need a home. All right. So this is going to lead it to a dude that we're going to talk about. Is he here in this slide? Oh, yeah. William Levitt. All right. So William Levitt, and they end up being called Levitt Towns, even though everybody copies his idea, but William Levitt was really the first one. So it takes years to build a house. So what William Levitt figures out, and this is really advances the home building industry, is what William Levitt does is William Levitt is going to turn around and figure out the blueprints to make one really good house. Very fast, effective house. Blueprints for one house. Then he's going to go out to a field that's near a city. It's not in a city. It's near a city. It might be 10 miles from a city. And he's going to buy 100 acres. And he is going to plow down every single tree in those 100 acres. And then he's going to make 400 houses. Each house gets a quarter acre. All right. He's going to make 400 houses in that 100 acre area. And what he's going to do is he's going to take that exact same blueprint and he's going to build it 400 times. All right. It's like the Ford assembly line of building houses. The reason this works faster is you have one company that goes in and frames all 400 houses. One company that goes in and puts roofs on 400 houses. One company that goes in and puts 400 windows in every house. By mass producing these houses, not only do they come out faster, all right, but what happens to the price of them? They go down. Makes houses very affordable. And does Billy have money to buy a house? Absolutely. So after World War II, these houses explode. They're called Levitt Towns. And it's these cities where there's just tons and tons and tons. Here, I got some stuff I want to show you. Let me show you a picture of what this house looks like. I'm going to get to that as a video clip. It's pretty good. So this is what a Levitt Town would look like. Now, this looks maybe creepy to you. If this was in color, it'd be bright green grass and stuff like that. So what they do is they mass produce these houses. All the houses pretty much look exactly the same. You can look at this and tell there's some houses that are different. But generally speaking, when they're brand new, all the houses look identical. That is kind of a thing in the 1950s, is that everything wanted to be exactly the same. That's not how we want things today. But keep in mind, Billy, the male of the household, typically makes these decisions. A whole generation of men grew up in the military. So sameness is a positive thing because you win, like everybody being the same and equal is a positive thing. Don't make comparisons to communism because that's also uncool in the 1950s. But being the same was not looked down on at all at this time because of this generation of men that had gone through World War II. They're nicknamed the Greatest Generation. So Billy and Sally, they go buy one of these houses right here. All right. And they walk in. All right. Now, before they can go buy this house, this is 10 miles away from the city. How you going to get there? They're going to buy a car. Not everybody had a car at the time, but after World War II, everybody does because this is the suburbs. All right. It's like suburban, meaning it's outside the city. So you have to drive from here to the city where a lot of the jobs are. The reason this wasn't done before is people didn't have the money to buy cars. Does Billy have the money to buy a car? Yes, he does. So Billy and Sally, they now have a car. They have a house. And to show you the difference, look, all these houses, they don't have driveways. William Levitt didn't even think about the fact that everybody needs a driveway, everybody's going to have a car. Like, this is how fast things happen. You can see some people have added on driveways here later. But anyway, so Sally and Billy, all right, they have a car, they have a house, they show up here in their own house, they walk in, and they ain't seen each other in like 4 years, and they're married. This is going to lead to the baby boom. Now, I don't know if you know where babies come from, all right, but I don't want to assume that you do, so I'll explain it to you, all right? Now, I have 2 kids of my own, so what I'm getting ready to tell you, this is true. When a man and woman love each other very much, they get married, they do something called special hugging. 9 months later, a stork brings a baby to a rainbow, drops the baby off at the rainbow baby slides down the rainbow to a pot of gold. A little leprechaun picks up the baby, runs it to the front door, rings the doorbell. That's where babies come from. Now, they're telling y'all some crazy stuff in health class, but Mr. Wagstaff, I wouldn't lie to you. That's what happens. All right. Anyway, it's called the baby boom generation. They're called boomers now. Okay, boomer. Here's what happens. There are so many Billy and Sallys. They all have a bunch of kids. So Billy and Sally's usually grew up on farms. So on farms, you have as many kids as possible. Why wouldn't you? So that same logic applies here. They don't need that many kids. There's also some other things. So the baby boom generation, all right, if you know anybody as a baby boomer, all right, ask them how many brothers and sisters they have. They probably have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's crazy, but they're living in the suburbs a lot of times. Massive amount of children are born. Not only was that still the culture to have a lot of kids at the time, it was another thing, the fact that medicine had advanced so much in World War II that kids don't die of the random diseases that they had previously died from. It's a much safer environment. So families were used to having 1 or 2 kids die. That doesn't happen anymore on average. So all the kids that you have are healthy and they survive. So you have the largest part of the population in the 1950s are babies. There are more babies than any other generation in America at the time. That's still true to present day. So this is why the baby boomers are so important, is because there's so dang many of them. So in the 1950s, what's the largest part of the population is babies. In the 1960s, it's going to be 10-year-olds. In the 1970s, it's going to be 20-year-olds. That's why right between the late 1960s and 1970s, the hippie movement comes out and everybody's like, woo, hippies are so crazy. No, they weren't. Hippies are no different than you. It just happened to be that the largest part of the population in America at the time was 17 and 18-year-olds. All right. And everybody freaked out over it. The hippies are nothing special. We'll talk about them in class, because you basically for the rest of this course, we're going to follow the baby boom because they are such a massive part of the population that whatever they do really changes society for good or bad. So the baby boomers are the babies here in the 1950s, and it absolutely skyrockets in the amount of babies that exist in America. All right, so let me go back. So the baby boom, tons of babies are born. Gasoline is cheap. Everybody bought cars. William Levitt built Levitt Towns, which is those massive houses. And people are going to move to suburbs because they can afford cars. They can have these houses outside the cities. I got a video clip here. I got some good video clips here of they're real short of some of the stuff at the time.
Between 1948 and 58, builders sold 13 million new houses, practically all with knotty pine rumpus rooms and 2-car garages. There was a sameness about our ranch-style and split-level homes, but we didn't care. Sameness was the code of the decade.
This is a picture I already showed. And here's a little video clip of the baby booms.
The biggest boom,
like herds of them,
was in babies. Millions of Americans now had the future to think about.
2,700,000 babies born in 1945. A nation's future is its people. And these are the people who are going to be the United States 20, 30, 40 years and more from now.
And that's the baby boom generation. This is a young little okay boomer. This is just a random stamp of like looking in and all right. So life in the 1950s. There's some other cool stuff that comes out. So this dude, you've never heard of Dr. Jonas Salk, and it is crazy. And I was just talking about him the other day with somebody because of the current climate with the coronavirus and all that. Of what Dr. Jonas Salk did. So polio would kill people. Just kill people all the time, especially kids. Polio is an absolutely brutal disease that would wipe people out. You don't have to worry about that anymore. It's not a thing on Earth. Do you know why? Because of Dr. Jonas Salk. Dr. Jonas Salk discovered a vaccine for polio. You get a shot, you never get polio. All right? Now, how rich you think Dr. Jonas Salk got to this? Every single human on Earth needs this medicine. Dr. Jonas Salk doesn't charge for it. Dr. Jonas Salk gave away, as it spent every penny he had in his life in order to give it to as many people as possible. Not only does he not charge it, he would pay to have people get it. Dr. Jonas Salk saved millions and millions and millions of lives, guaranteed. And Dr. Jonas Salk is responsible for the vaccine that completely eliminated polio, and doesn't get the credit I think he deserves, because the fact that he could just charge $1 from each person and been a gazillionaire. But he doesn't. But Dr. Jonas Salk, really impressive person that he invented this thing or discovered this vaccine and didn't charge people for it. But it does eliminate polio around the world. It's what put FDR in the wheelchair and what ended up killing FDR when he got it a second time. All right. So in future units, we're going to talk about the women's rights movement. The women's rights movement gets a good start in the 1950s. So men go to work, women stay at home, take care of the kids and things like that. It was the typical nucleus of the family. There's new technology that has come out now, like washing machines, electric clothes dryer, dishwashers, lawnmowers. There's these other things that have come out that are drastically going to change women's lives, because any household chores were women's job. That was the expectation in society. Before a washing machine, everything had to be done by hand. Now with washing machines, it's much quicker to do dishes. Electric clothes dryers, instead of having to hang everything on the clothesline, you can just throw them in the clothes dryer and it washes it. Washing machines for clothes. I'd mentioned dishwashers. You can put everything in the dishwasher and the sinks. All the stuff, wash it in the sink, you can do it in the dishwasher. Washing machines, before washing machines, you had to take all the clothes with soap and scrub them on a washboard. Now you can just throw them in a machine and it washes them for you. All of these things save women tons of time. Once women's entire 18-hour workdays that they have isn't consumed with just doing chores, because these machines drastically help their chores, women start getting involved in other aspects of society, whether it be politics or art or the workplace. And they start realizing that women aren't treated the same in the workplace as men are, and it's going to kind of be the beginning of the women's rights movement is going to come out from the 1950s, or get its start in the 1950s as well, as women have more time to get involved in other things in life. The Eisenhower interstate system. This might blow your mind. We create I-40, I-95, and all this in the 1950s because we're going to copy Hitler. The Autobahn in Germany was sweet. We need that here. And I use I-40. There's interstate highways all over the country that crisscross. I-40, the one that runs right by Davie, was created in the 1950s. If you've never thought about it, the interstate highway is crazy. I-40 starts at Wilmington. If you go on I-40 and just go to the beach, you end up in Wilmington. If you get on I-40 in Wilmington and you turn around and you go the other direction and you never get off the highway, you end up in California and you never hit a stoplight. Never hit a stoplight. Long, straight stretches. And the interstate highway system, it crisscrosses America. The reason for it was if we're attacked somewhere in America, our military needs to be able to move quickly across America. And they're going to use the interstate highway system to do so. while we're not at war and our military doesn't need those roads, the civilians can use it. Present day, we have C-130s and these big planes that can carry everything, so it's not necessary. But back then, it was. And the Eisenhower interstate system was pretty impressive. It still is today. We still use it all the time today. But it was designed copying Hitler's Autobahn. And planned obsolescence. So you could buy a brand new car back then for like $3,000. It may not have been that much. However, the car companies would make sure their cars would break apart in like 5 years. Why do you think they did? They did that on purpose. They can make cars last longer, but they design them so they break apart in about 5 years. Why? So you have to go buy a new one. This ends up becoming a thing at the time. It's called planned obsolescence. Cars have stopped doing it as much, mainly because people want to buy the longest lasting car on the road, so car companies have moved away from it. You know who does do planned obsolescence? Cell phone companies like Apple. They'll make sure you see somebody with an iPhone 3, all right? Not only you're like, oh, I can't believe you got an iPhone 3, but you're like, man, I bet that thing is slow as snot. Because Apple does that on purpose to slow down older phones so that you have to go buy a new phone. They do it on purpose, and they have admitted it now. And all phone companies do it. They make these really advanced handheld computers, which are your cell phones, slow down and get worse over time, so you have to go buy a new one. Pro tip, if you just put a brand new battery in an old phone, it'll work like it was brand new. I'm speaking from experience, do it all the time. Whenever I do get a new phone, I take my old phone, put a new battery in it, and go to Amazon, like $20, and then follow a YouTube video. And then my kids get my old phone for like watching videos and stuff on it. They can't make calls or text. But it works as good as it did the day I got it. So, FYI. All right. All right, so here's an announcement or an advertisement for washer and dryers in the 1950s. Look, this one's crazy. It's a washer and dryer. So you put your stuff in there, it washes it, and then dries it, and it's one machine. I'm not quite sure why we don't do that. Maybe it's because you can't do as much laundry, because if you have washer and dryer, you can like just cycle out the loads and you can do more faster. But I've never even seen a washer-dryer combination that does it all in one thing. And for $500, man, that's like $10,000 probably in today's money. That's crazy money. All right.
The cars of the 50s were inspired by our new jet fighters. Each year they were longer, lower, wider, more powerful, and less fuel efficient, with bigger, shinier fins. In 1955, gasoline cost 29 cents a gallon, and the average new car sold for $1,800. Early in the decade, Secretary of Defense Charles Wilson said that what was good for General Motors was good for the country. He was probably right. More cars meant more road building contracts and the explosion of suburbia.
All right. So cars, man, America really from the beginning of cars and really takes off in the 1950s has this obsession with cars more so than anywhere else on earth. In large part because suburban neighborhoods are going to take off, and we drive more than anybody else on earth, like by far. And really, the 1950s, you start seeing the American obsession with cars. All right, entertainment. 1950s TV shows, man. TV shows took off because televisions took off. Everybody's watching TVs. So it was some stat. I got a video here at the end that I'll talk about it. At the beginning of the 1950s, there's a really, really small percentage of people that have TVs. By the end of the 1950s, it's like everybody. Like it's in the 1950s, you had to have a TV. So people watch TV all the time. There are shows that would come on TV, and they're really popular. So the most famous show at the time, the most popular was one called The Honeymooners, where if you watch an old episode of it today, it's really just making fun of domestic abuse. It's this man threatening to punch his wife all the time, and they're like, ah, it's hilarious. And you're like, that seems inappropriate by today's standards. But So Honeymooners was very, very popular. It was like the #1 ranked show at the time. However, it's really hard to find episodes of Honeymooners. And the reason is because the way TV shows, because everybody's new to TV, all right, you would have to have a schedule, all right? Now, the fact that I'm going to have to explain to people in a few years of how TV shows get scheduled, like they come on at 7:30, and you had to be there at 7:30 to watch it. If you didn't watch it, it's gone. I think you guys still understand how that works, even though we're all spoiled with Netflix and all that stuff. So what happens is, so at 7:30, like the show studio that does the Honeymooners, at 7:30 they start acting. It is acted out almost like a play. All right. So these sitcoms from like 7:30 to 8, they act it out and they take commercial breaks and everything like that. But it is a play. So if they mess up, they just keep on going. It's not a thing. And then when the show's over, all right, let's do another show tomorrow. All right. Like a new one tomorrow. So it was a very different thing. The most famous one that you have heard of, most likely, all right, hopefully I'm not showing my age too much. There's a show called I Love Lucy that came out in the 1950s. Most of y'all have seen an episode of I Love Lucy. Let's see, I got a, come on, where am I at? All right, so hopefully you've seen this before. If not, it doesn't matter. I'll tell you the whole story anyway. So today, the most well-known, by far, TV show of the 1950s is I Love Lucy. Like, hands down. Because you've probably seen a bunch of episodes of I Love Lucy. If you've seen one episode, you've seen 50, all right? Typically speaking of I Love Lucy. So her show was popular in the 1950s. It was usually about the third most popular show on TV. There is a reason that her show was the most popular, or is most popular now. So this is Lucille Ball, all right? So she was a very famous comedian, female comedian, and they wanted her to do a TV show with her, and she's going to be like a housewife, and she just gets in mischief all the time. She's the main character, but it's on her, and she says, sure, but I'm only going to do it if my real life husband, who is also in the entertainment, who's a musician, if he can play my husband on the TV show. And they're like, sure, that's fine. And there's a guy in the back going, no, you can't do that. And they're like, why not? And they're like, because she's not married to a white guy. All right. And they're like, what? So this is Desi Arnaz. This is her real life husband who plays her husband on the show. All right. In the show, his name is Ricky Ricardo. All right. So Desi Arnaz is Cuban. All right. So he's Hispanic. So they have an interracial marriage. This is the 1950s. I mean, this is like completely unacceptable. And she's like, I won't do a show unless I can do it with my own husband. So they're like, oh, we really want Lucille Ball, but oh my gosh, what are we going to do? So what they decide is they're fine. They're going to let, because Desi Arnaz is popular as well. They're like, fine. But here's what's going to happen. You're not allowed to do it live. You can't do your show live. We're going to tape your show in advance. After it's taped, we're going to let all the producers watch it and make sure there's nothing that could offend America. Like, they're not allowed to kiss. They're not allowed to hold hands. When you show a picture of their bedroom, they sleep in 2 separate beds in the show. Like, they want to make sure that this did not offend the racist American public by watching it before it airs. She agrees to this. So they do the episodes. They always record it in advance. They check, make sure there's nothing questionable, and then they put it on TV. They don't realize this for a while. So years go by, all right, of doing this, and then they realize, wait a minute, we still have those copies of the shows we did years ago. We can just run those again, charge advertisers a second time, and it doesn't cost us anything. Because they recorded her show, it came up with reruns. All the other shows were done live, and they didn't record them. They just don't have any. They just didn't think to record them. So when you think of the 1950s TV shows, this is the one everybody sees because all the more popular ones weren't recorded. So this was always popular. It was about the number 3 ranked show, but it's really cool how that works out and kind of shows you the mentality of the time. So the Mickey Mouse Club came out at the time in the 1950s. Music, rock and roll comes out. Little Richard is most famous for rock and roll. But Little Richard's black. All right. Rock and roll is black music. So rock and roll comes out. It's not going to be until the late 50s, early 60s with like Elvis Presley starts making black music, aka rock and roll, and pulls it into white stream music. But rock and roll does come out in the 1950s, but it is mainly considered black music. And again, we just completely segregated our society. Each race gets their own culture, and you can't intermingle. And it's very strict in the 1950s. So a lot of what we're going to talk about as we go through history at this point is how those barriers start getting torn down. I got a good little video here on TVs.
On January 1st, 1950, there were only 3 million television sets in America. But in that year, we bought another 7 million and made the big shift from radio to television. The first coast-to-coast coaxial cable was completed in 1951, and 40 million Americans watched President Truman speak at the Japanese Treaty Conference in San Francisco. In the first happy days of television, we were hypnotized by old Hopalong Cassidy movies. Friday Night Fights from New York. Jackie Gleason and Art Carney in The Honeymooners were the biggest hit. The comedy superstar of the 50s was Lucille Ball. Beginning in 1951, I Love Lucy rated high with audiences every year.
And that's Lucille Ball and her husband in real life that were on that show. All right, politics. Last thing we'll talk about today. So in 1948, let me explain what happens in 1948 here. So Harry Truman, even though he was the president taking over for FDR and became president in 1943, in 1948 he has to basically run for re-election again. All right. When he runs for re-election, it doesn't look like he's going to win. There's a lot of stuff at the time, kind of like how Winston Churchill wasn't real popular after World War II because people wanted to move on. Kind of happened to Truman. There's some questions here on should we have dropped the atomic bomb? Like, people are starting to realize we dropped that on civilians, man. Like, so Truman isn't as wildly popular as you think he would be. So in 1948, he looks like he's going to lose. All right, he's running against a guy named Dewey. Dewey is going to win in a landslide, it looks like. So much so, and now here's what happens. So Truman campaigns heavily to win re-election. Dewey just waits to be elected. Like, he's just like, I don't need to do anything. I'm just going to wait. Big surprise. Truman wins in 1948. He beats him in the popular vote and the Electoral College. It was a huge shock. Nobody expected that. So much so, there's a very famous picture right here of Truman holding up a sign that says, Dewey defeats Truman. Which is not true because Truman defeated Dewey, but they went ahead and printed the newspapers before the results even came in because no possible way that Truman could win. So not only does Truman win the popular vote, he wins the Electoral College as well. All right. So we need to mention this new guy named Richard Nixon. All right. So in 1952, President Truman served 2 terms. All right. He's done with his time in office. Eisenhower is elected and becomes the president of the United States. We already mentioned throughout the 1950s, Eisenhower is going to be the guy. He's the war hero that gets picked because he was the most famous one. The rest of the world already respected him because he is the Allied Supreme Commander. We've talked about Eisenhower. We'll mention him more. I want to talk about his vice president. Now, the Secretary of State was John Foster Dulles, the guy that wants to nuke everything. His vice president is a very savvy politician named Richard Nixon. If Richard Nixon didn't end up becoming president and then end up being the only president we've ever had that quits and get in a whole bunch of trouble and do all this other stuff, probably wouldn't mention this story. But knowing that this dude's shady, this is a really cool story. So Richard Nixon gets busted when he's the vice president under Eisenhower for taking illegal campaign contributions. Like, people were giving him gifts and he was taking them, which is like a big no-no. And Richard Nixon knows it, just didn't think he would get caught, and he gets caught. This is like a political firing squad when you get caught like taking gifts. So he goes in front of the Senate, all right? And the Senate is going to grill him over how I think it's the House of Representatives, Congress, we'll simplify, we'll say Congress. Congress grills him over, why did you take gifts, all right? This is on national TV. Richard Nixon, how is he going to get himself out of this? He clearly took stuff illegally, and they got him on, he's on live TV now trying to, like, what's he going to do? And he pulls this thing out of a hat called the Checkers speech, which is famously referred to in history. And man, looking back on it, we're like, this dude, he's good. He's real good. Shady, but good. So he's like, you know what? So they're like, what do you have to say for yourself that you took all these gifts? He's like, you know what? I did. And everybody's like, oh, was I not expecting that? It's like, all right. He's like, one of the gifts that I got was a little poodle puppy. I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old daughter at home. And I took that poodle home to them. And I gave them that poodle because they've been really wanting a poodle. And I said, honey, I've been so busy with my job trying to take care of America, I haven't had time for my daughters. So I thought they deserved to have a puppy. So I took that poodle puppy that was given to me and I gave it to my daughters. And they love that dog. They play with that dog every single day. And they named that dog Checkers. They love Checkers. Checkers is awesome. Checkers is part of our family. Now, if you're going to sit here and tell me that I have to give back these gifts and that you expect me to go to my 6-year-old, my 3-year-old and look them in the eye and be like, I'm sorry, darling, I have to take Checkers from you because that's an illegal political campaign contribution. I'm sorry, I won't do it. You can do whatever you want to me, but I ain't going to take a puppy from my children. And if you want to go take a puppy from my daughters, you're going to have to do it over my dead body. And when he says this, guess what the whole country is watching? It says, oh, it's okay, Richard. You're good. Dude, this speech he comes up with off the top of his head, everybody's like, you're good, just going home. Sorry we ever brought it up. They don't talk about the millions of dollars he took, like all the other stuff he did. And it's not until later they're like, wait a minute. Like, this dude just manipulated this whole thing, but it's famously called the Checkers speech. He just played on everybody's heartstrings and got out of it. So he clearly did stuff illegal, but just he thinks he's smart enough to get out of everything. And we'll come back to that personality conflict with Nixon later on. But that is as far as we're going to get today. So I hope you guys have a good rest of the day.